In this video, I'm going to go into my thoughts on the Disney live-action movie Maleficent, and hopefully articulate in a more or less coherent way why it is that the movie bothers me so much. It's not a terrible movie. I'm not going to rail against its very existence like a 2D Disney purist, and if I'm going to be completely transparent, I wasn't even a huge fan of the original movie, with the small exception being Maleficent herself. But what I will do is try and make sense of why the movie fell short for me narratively, and what I might have done to change it without destroying the lore or narrative pieces that the movie has already set up. I'd like to stress that it's not that I think the movie has no merits. It's quite the opposite, actually. I see an overabundance of narrative potential that wasn't being used. And so, as an act of creative catharsis and a little bit of self-loathing, I'm going to force myself to explain why it is Maleficent the movie fell short, what it could have been, and why its very existence makes me sad to think about, because I'm reminded of the movie that we could have had rather than the one that we got. To start with, Maleficent is such a missed opportunity because it's trying to take a bland, one-dimensional story about a jaded witch not being invited to a baby shower, and turn it into something complex and deep, while simultaneously running away from any of the actual deep or complex themes of the narrative arcs that could have made the story more rich. It unironically stripped down the narrative potential it had built up in its first act by watering down its characters' motivations and insisting on telling another one-sided story about a cursed princess, but this time from the perspective of the Mistress of Evil.
You should have tried harder!
The problem with this is that the writers seem to think that a complex villain will be too boring for the audience, and instead opted to retcon Maleficent's personality to make her a patron saint who loves nature and can do no wrong. And since this newly branded Maleficent is such a good person, clearly the people who oppose her should be in equal parts unlikable, since we can't have a clash of wills with equal merit to them. We can't have it where either side could be right, where real politics and relationships are messy, and illustrate how sometimes demonizing your enemies is the first thing that we do to justify our own side regardless of the facts. Because that would be too real. So now every character aside from Maleficent has to be dumbed down or outright deplorable in order to justify bolstering her sainthood. It's a similar problem that many Mary Sue characters face, and I'm sure I don't have to name them for you to know instantly who I'm talking about. But to the very least, we can say that Maleficent escapes the Mary Sue trope by having an actual gripe against a particular character, and at best is depicted as evil and at worst is depicted as petty in universe. Unlike most Mary Sues that get lumped into the everybody loves me or wants to be me trope. So I can at least praise the movie in that aspect where it didn't completely retcon the character's role in the story, even if her personality is unrecognizable compared to the original. And while I'm going to do my best not to harp too hard on this movie comparing it to its predecessor, since I want to look at this movie as its own thing rather than an adaptation, it's difficult for me not to point out the certain contrivances that were shoehorned in simply because the writers were being forced to write a Maleficent story during the same timeline as the story of Sleeping Beauty. I would love a movie that would go over Maleficent's past as a standalone film but would ultimately lead to the fairy tale we all know in the future. But then they wouldn't be able to capitalize on the notoriety of Sleeping Beauty. It's fine, I get it. If you want to make a story about how true love is something that you find more in familiar relationships, and your main character is Maleficent, then you need to find a way to push these two together. I have no problem with that. I've accepted that that's the story of Sleeping Beauty, and that Aurora is raised in the forest, away from society, and if you're going to have Maleficent wear both hats of Mistress of All Evil, but also Jaded Fairy Godmother, then fine. But if we're really going to be restructuring Maleficent's personality, role, and likability as a character, do we really have to strip away all the good aspects of the other fairies to do that? It's not as though the movie needed the fairies to be incompetent or annoying to work. Heck, they were a little off in the original movie too, but the difference was, there wasn't any malice behind their characters. They were just inexperienced at being human, but still good-spirited and loving caretakers to Aurora. But here, I'm supposed to hate them, and not want them on screen, and it works. And I do. I understand that the writers were limited in their scope of what Disney wanted, and it's a shame that they couldn't branch out, but that doesn't negate the negative changes that they made to the characters that aren't Maleficent. The three fairies are painful to watch and listen to, and while they're not my biggest problem with the movie, it's still very telling that the narrative was scared to have more than two competent characters in the whole story, and both of them are the villain and henchman. The fairies are an obstacle to Maleficent getting closer to Aurora, and so they needed to be downgraded to placeholder strawmen so that Maleficent is forced to look after Aurora herself. It didn't have to be this way. It could have been that Aurora grew up in a relatively sound home with loving aunts who cared for her, but as she grew up, she began to wonder what was beyond the forest. To see if there were any other people around them, since in-universe, Aurora is a character with no one to relate to. She's alone and isolated. How much more impactful would it have been if one day the two of them accidentally met in the forest and Aurora was just so dense that she didn't see Maleficent as a threat, since isolation has made her naive to these things? It would change the entire dynamic between them, because now it's Aurora who initiates the relationship, and Maleficent is now the one on the defensive. She doesn't like Aurora, but sees her past self in her, the naive, love-struck, innocent side of herself that she lost years ago. And this makes her both love and hate her. But she wouldn't dare kill her, because then her curse wouldn't take place, and we can't have that. She may even consider telling her about the curse, just to hurt her, but the satisfaction of watching the slow burn would be too alluring, so she'd stay quiet. Instead, she may toy with her, even letting her think that they're friends, just to savor this moment, since it's been so long since she's seen the baby she's cursed. Conversely, Aurora could see Maleficent as her first real friend, and those layers between two relatively intelligent and capable characters would have been so much more rewarding than having to sit through the lackluster narrative nanny cam that we were stuck with. But while we're on the subject, it's kind of hard to care about what's at stake in these scenes. Because not only do we know how the story ends, but just making Maleficent a jaded ex who develops a mommy complex doesn't make me root for her more. It doesn't add any depth to the relationship she has with Aurora, or justify her very odd choice of spending the next 16 years playing house to facilitate her petty revenge. Because if she's the objectively powerful and assumedly intelligent unofficial de facto leader of the Moors, then there are plenty of more immediate and tangible ways in which she can get revenge on her ex outside of being the world's most effective backseat parent for almost 2 decades. And this is ignoring the fact that she chose to do nothing for at least 9 months leading up to Aurora's birth, just standing around looking regal and miffed, but doing nothing. As if this character, who has been established to show more initiative than all of the Moors, just decided to hang out after being betrayed so deeply. It's a story choice that puts Maleficent on pause so that the things in Sleeping Beauty can happen, ignoring the pacing and initiatives of the Maleficent arc that took place in Act 1. And we haven't even gotten to my real problem with Act 1 yet, but don't worry, we're getting there. When talking about the relationship between Aurora and Maleficent, there isn't actually much to go off of. Maleficent has one good line with her, and it was spoiled in the trailer, so no wonder they used it for the advertisement. The two talk about nothing, and as far as I can tell, have nothing in common. The only thing keeping them together is the plot and Aurora's inability to experience negative emotions, aside from when the plot calls for it. Look, it's a side note, but the fact that Aurora's emotional threshold can only hold unbelievable levels of inhuman joy and sparse bursts of sadness only when the narrative demands for it is really unnerving to watch, and it gets old fast. I know that in the beginning she was blessed with beauty and also the inability to experience human emotions, but can we maybe pull back on that a little bit? I'm not digging the manic pixie happiness the girl is emulating, and it's really difficult to see her as human. Real teenagers, regardless of isolation from outer society, are going through major changes with their hormones and body, and with such limited prospects in life with no human interaction at Aurora's disposal, she should be at least a little frustrated with her situation and a little less bubbly. I'm not buying that she's upset about being alone. She's too happy all the time. It's not working. Isolation should be her major issue as a character. Her first and foremost issue as a person should be that she feels lonely. That's why it would be so easy for her to cling to Maleficent, since she's probably the one new thing that Aurora's been able to experience since childhood. That's all I'm saying. She doesn't have to be a nobody understands me, it's not a phase, all I want is more princess. She just has to frown every once in a while, that's all. Anyway, back to the movie. Since Aurora is a character with no friends and Maleficent is a layered character that has a love-hate relationship with this girl, it may be interesting to have the two of them go through some exchanges throughout their meetings. Maybe after realizing that Aurora is more like her than not, Maleficent would soften and show a moment of weakness, letting the mask slip for just a little bit to reveal that, actually, she's not as cold as she tries to make herself seem, but that it's her way of being strong so that she can never be hurt again. Maybe she's saying this out loud. Maybe she's saying it out of empathy. Maybe it's a jaded comment that she's using to take a dig at Aurora without Aurora noticing. But that's not the point. The point is that the audience knows. And that's why we feel for the two of them, because we, the audience, understand. Whatever Maleficent says, whether it be about trying to be strong or wanting to be alone, or maybe how isolation is a better way of going through life because it protects you from the people who want to hurt you, Aurora, who doesn't understand the double meaning, could counter back with something hopeful, like, well, I'm happy now, because you're my closest and most dear friend, and now neither one of us has to be alone. And don't worry, because no matter what happens, I promise I won't let anybody hurt you. No one should have to live their life all alone. Which could be a sign of Aurora's naivety and endearing nature, but also an example of dramatic irony where Maleficent and the audience know why she's alone, and the lines and exchanges like that would give their conversations weight. There are a lot of things you could have done that might have facilitated Maleficent and Aurora's relationship better, but honestly, I could forgive all of that. The whole movie, including the terrible baby scenes and obnoxious fairies, could have gone down all the same, and I wouldn't really care. I'm much more concerned about the fact that this Disney movie about a Disney villain has seemed to have forgotten about adding a villain to its movie. Stefan is a bad villain. I hate him as a villain. He's an unbelievable waste of a character, and the movie just decides to throw away all of his prime narrative potential despite devoting the whole first section of the film to the relationship that he builds with Maleficent. The very relationship that makes the betrayal and subsequent plot of the movie even possible. Now, I'm not going to try and defend everything about the opening of the movie. The narrator, the generic conflict between the humans and the Moors, the we don't mix with your kind race / Romeo and Juliet parody between the two lovebirds, which is totally original and not done to death, I swear. But what I will defend is the romance. Hear me out. The chemistry between these two is non-existent, but that's not what I'm invested in. That's an acting thing, and not to do with the plot itself. The narrator has told me that these two love each other, and I trust the narrator, because that's what the movie's told me. And the narrator, I am assuming, is telling the truth. The point is, what I care about is the fact that in this story about true love, we are first introduced to two kids on opposite sides of the tracks with a sweet, albeit rushed relationship that starts off as a friendship but then grows over the course of their lives and spans what looks like a little more than a decade. The movie gives most of Stefan's characterization through narration, and basically breaks all of the show-don't-tell rules when it comes to the depths of their eventual relationship. Save for one instance in which we see him throw away his precious family heirloom the second he realizes that the iron ring hurts Maleficent's hand. That was a good storytelling moment. Good job, movie. The problem comes when this is his only characterization. Not only does Stefan play a pathetic role in the movie as an antagonist of the film, his impact on the narrative from an emotional level is so low that in the process of writing the script, I couldn't remember his name and had to Google it because his relevance to the plot, despite being the plot's impetus, is so non-existent my reptilian brain blocked him from memory. That's how bad he is. He is a Disney villain. And I had to Google his name. That is not okay when you consider the absolute pantheon of great and memorable Disney villains that have come out of the animation powerhouse and had an impact on generations. The movie Maleficent exists because of the love we have for Disney villains. So why did they phone this in so hard when they had a perfect narrative served up for them in the first 5 minutes? The beginning of Maleficent shows a sweet, albeit rushed, development of Maleficent the fairy and Stefan the farm boy, as they start what begins as an innocent friendship and eventually blossoms into something more. The extended years of their relationship is told mostly through narration, which is, I guess, a good way of showing that the years are passing in a short amount of time. And in this montage, we get to see what looks like a genuine connection between the two of them. Like, they're literally cloaked in light, with Maleficent's wings giving a sort of angelic air to the scene. This is like heaven's light that we're talking about. Not to mention the fact that the concept of true love is evoked just in this opening narrative. And if we're going to believe in true love in any form in this movie, the form where you grow up with a person and get to know them over the course of years and eventually realize you've fallen for them is probably the most mature and realistic depiction of true love you'll find in a Disney movie. Not even our mainstream protagonists get that treatment, and in most generous cases, we get an undefined amount of time devoted to the relationship that could be days, could be months, but is definitely not years. So from a relationship standpoint, Maleficent has already positioned herself as the poster child for actual adult relationship goals that don't have to do with wealth, opulence, or even infatuation, since both characters start off with virtually nothing going into the relationship, but they're happy together. That is sweet. I like that. Good job, movie. Aside from the show don't tell rule being broken egregiously when it comes to the actual adult development of these characters, the movie is already starting off on a really high note in terms of the setup. That is, until the big whoops. So it turns out that all the king's horses and all the king's men are racist, and they want to annex the Moors. This starts a turf war between the kingdom of man and the Moor kingdom, in which the king is fatally injured and the Moors successfully drive the humans back. While all of this is going on, Stefan has been systematically working his way up the ladder of power and has found himself acting as a servant to the king as he lay dying, hearing that the king loathes the Moors, but Maleficent in particular, and says that whoever kills Maleficent for him will then be named his successor and heir to the throne. This is a much more difficult task for the average general or prince to accomplish because the Moors are protected by magic. However, Stefan knows Maleficent and often frequents the Moors, so he is easily let in if not outwardly invited to enter. It's here, where out of his own selfish greed and lust for power, that he drugs Maleficent and uses iron chains to burn off her wings so that he can present them to the king and become king himself. This works, and Stefan marries the king's daughter and becomes the next ruler of the kingdom of man, while Maleficent wakes up in what looks to be a loosely veiled rape allegory, revealing her origin and motivations for cursing Stefan's child and where her quest for vengeance starts. Great! Now here's everything wrong with that. The fact that this genuinely cute relationship is broken down by something like greed is such a weak writing decision, and it hurts the narrative overall because it waters down Stefan's character to generic farm boy who is also bad man and also selfish. Bad man. The pieces for a perfect and complex conflict were laid out on a silver platter and these people pushed it away with an upturned nose. It genuinely hurts me. What if, hear me out, Stefan was a person? Not an archetype, not a one-dimensional villain, which this movie is trying to dissuade us from thinking exist. Stefan is a man. He was never evil. Let me explain. What if after the king came back injured from the battle, he was ranting and raving about Maleficent like a madman, saying things like, "That vile witch, I'll kill her, I'll kill her! I don't care if I have to burn down all of the Moors to do it, that woman will die!" And from Stefan's perspective, he knows that Maleficent loves the Moors more than anything, and he, loving her, would do whatever it takes to protect her. So how much more dramatic would it be if when he took Maleficent's wings, he didn't do it to spite her or to gain the crown? He did it because he knew as long as she was in the sky, they would never stop hunting her. The Moors would forever be under attack with numerous casualties on both sides. The war between human and fae would go on forever. As a servant or a farm boy, Stefan has very little power to help the woman that he loves. But as king, even a begrudging king, he could ensure the Moors' safety and put an end to any human expeditions into the Moors that would put people in danger. This is a decision that he'd have to make on his own, one that would alienate him from the woman that he loves and also isolate him among his peers as a Moor sympathizer. But it's a decision that he'd choose to live with, because it would be better that Maleficent hate him and live than love him and die. Changing this motivation makes his actions one of self-sacrifice and heroic resignation, and is very in line with the actions of a poor farm boy who selflessly discards his most prized possession at the drop of a hat because he realizes that it causes harm to someone that he loves. This is the character we should have had, the selfless man. That makes this story so much more deep because it's a story without a villain now. Not only does this change in motivation add depth to his character, it creates so many more opportunities for narrative drama throughout the story. Stefan becomes a tragic figure who not only is pushed away from the woman he loves by his own hand, but is forced to marry a woman that he doesn't care for, and who, in his mind, could never hold a candle to the woman he scarred. The one saving grace of his life is the child that he has, who is innocent of all of these crimes, only to have the woman that he loves enter in a rage and curse the child in front of him. Ironically, the only two women he truly loves pitted against one another because he tried to do the right thing, the noble thing. This then makes his spiral into madness even more believable as the years go by and Aurora's 16th birthday gets closer. He's riddled with guilt as his wife blames him for what's happened, and she now realizes that the man her father made her marry is and has always been in love with the same witch that killed her father and cursed her daughter. This grief could kill her. I mean, it could explain why she's not at the end of the movie. I'm not suggesting that Disney goes for the full suicide run, but it's Disney. She could die of grief, it's possible. But it would at least explain why she's not there. You can get a lot of mileage out of Stefan and the Queen having fights over what to do about their situation. The Queen saying hurtful things like, "This is all your fault. It's all because of that witch of yours." He could interrupt her saying like, "Don't call her that." Showing that he's still a good person and he cares about her. And the Queen could look at him disgusted, saying, "If it weren't for you, I'd be holding my daughter right now." I mean, this is a dark story that we're not taking advantage of. Like, conversations like these could give more depth to the story and make the kingdom actually feel lived in. As if these characters are actual people and their conflicting motivations are the driving force of the plot, rather than just one-sided story now told from another one-sided story. Oh boy. More of the same, but not. I love it. Thanks. This also allows for there to be a final confrontation between Maleficent and Stefan, where you could kind of see yourself landing on either side, which is interesting. In a movie that's supposed to make us feel the grays in between the black and white storytelling of old Disney. It's great to have a Civil War story, essentially, between two parties that you can side with. That's why the Marvel movies do so well when they do Civil War storylines, is because you could side with either Cap or Iron Man. They're both kind of right, and you can make an argument for either side. You could even have a moment where Stefan breaks down and explains to Maleficent why it is he did what he did, revealing that he never had any malice towards her and he did it because he loves her, and he still loves her even now after everything that's happened. And however this information affects Maleficent, your mileage may vary, but that's not really the point. The point is that this final conflict and ultimate moment of choice is where Maleficent has to choose whether or not she's going to be the fairy godmother or the mistress of all evil. It's what I imagine the pinnacle of a Maleficent movie would be. In other words, this is the moment that matters. This choice is what the movie has all been leading up to. And it's the defining moment as to whether or not her story is told as the story of a hero or the story of a villain. And it might be cool to have a scene where Stefan pours his heart out, saying like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, I love you, please, please forgive me." He's torn down from insanity over the years. He's lost his wife, he's been estranged from his daughter, he's lost the woman he's loved, and he stands before her broken after a battle, and he doesn't know what to do, surrounded by nobles who don't trust him because his sympathy is for the Moors, and surrounded by the Moors who hate him because of what he did to Maleficent. He has no allies, and as he pours his heart out to Maleficent, she can turn to him in her cold and uncompromising way and say no. That would be an awesome scene. I would have loved to have seen that because it makes her actions seem evil, and yet we can justify them. We can feel her rage and understand why. That's the point of finding the gray between the black and white narrative. It's important to remember that the premise of this movie is that not everything is as it seems, and no character is fully black or white. The layers of complexity found in a villain are what make the characters rich and interesting and compelling. It's the very reason that the movie exists, and part of why we like the stories of villains just as much, if not more, than we love our heroes. So when a movie about the complexities of a villain decides to make a flat antagonist, it kind of hurts me. I feel like the people who worked on this film genuinely wanted to make something great, but were constrained by what they were and weren't allowed to get away with when it comes to making what constitutes as a safe Disney movie. Overall, Maleficent is a relatively average movie that hurts me because it could have been something great if only they decided to treat the grown-up live-action version of this character with a bit more maturity. Thank you for listening. This has been my 2 cents about Maleficent and why I feel that it's a missed opportunity. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. I am genuinely curious about what people think about my take on Maleficent. So far, when I've told people my ideas about the movie, they've been like, "Oh man, that would have been really cool." But there are always some diehard fans who are like, "No, it's trash, but it's my trash and I want it. You're just as filthy as it is." I'm genuinely curious. Is this the the Tommy Wiseau Room for you? Is it it's just an average Disney movie that's sort of watered down and you don't particularly care either way? Or are you like me and it bothered you that they didn't take it as far as they could have? Let me know in the comments section. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Have a good day. Bye-bye.